Joanne is the Executive Director of the Provincial Association of Transition Houses and Services of Saskatchewan. She's a longtime social justice advocate who spent 2 decades working frontline with women survivors of intimate partner violence at Moose Jaw Transition House. She is co-chair of the Board of Directors for Women's Shelters Canada, a panelist on the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability, and served on Saskatchewan's first Domestic Violence Death Review Committee in 2017-2018. Joanne strives to address the issue of interpersonal violence through public education, advocacy, and collaboration with community partners and government. It's my pleasure to present Joanne.
Thank you very much, Josh, and thank all of you for being with us today. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here so that we can get started. Okay, so our webinar today, the first in the series, is called Domestic Violence, What to Know, Say, and Do. And of course, I just want to check, Josh, you're seeing my screen here. Okay, I'm just wondering why I'm not advancing here. Of course, this is going to happen. Do it like that. So just briefly about our organization, PATHS. Josh had mentioned we are the Provincial Association of Transition Houses and Services, initially formed in 1984 to be a network for women's shelters in the province. We, in the late 90s, we actually added domestic violence counseling services to our members. So those would be agencies like Family Service Regina, Family Service Saskatoon. And we're currently standing at 24 member agencies across the province. We span the south from Swift Current and Estevan Weyburn area, all the way to the north, La Ronge and Black Lake. So we do represent all of our members, and we feel that that gives our organization a really good idea of what's currently going on the ground in terms of intimate partner and family violence. Josh had mentioned a little bit about the partnership between Saskatchewan SPCA, Stops to Violence, and PATHS. We are all some commonalities. We are all three organizations that are provincial in scope. We are member agencies, and we have a common goal through all three organizations, which is to address violence and abuse, whether that be for humans or animals. So a lot of this work has centered around, our joint work is centered around something that's been known as the link. So that is the link between abuse of animals and abuse of people. You see the quote on my screen there from Phil Arkow, coordinator of the National Link Coalition. When animals are abused, people may be at risk. When people are abused, animals may be at risk. So just briefly to give you a visual here, to show the overlapping of different forms of abuse. So animal abuse, child maltreatment, elder abuse, and domestic violence are all different aspects of abuse that may be happening in one household, or certain aspects may be happening. The key thing to remember is that they are linked. Again, when there is risk of domestic violence, there is also risk of child maltreatment. And the same goes for the risk of abuse of animals. In future webinars, you're going to have the opportunity to learn more about this. There has been a growing body of research on the link. On the Prairies, this was sparked by a report published by the Alberta SPCA in 2012. And in 2016, there was a research report published. It was a partnership again. It was, I think, the start maybe of our formal partnership between Stops to Violence, PATHS, and Saskatchewan SPCA. And you can see the report there, the link, Interpersonal Violence and Abuse and Animal Safekeeping, is available on the website of probably all three organizations. And just to let you know that we're currently working on some research as well. The surveys and interviews have already taken place with animal welfare and human service providers, as well as the general public and survivors, and that's a new addition to the research here in Saskatchewan. And so the report is in progress, and that will be the topic of future webinars in this series. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is not the research on the link, but it's more specific to domestic violence or intimate partner violence, what to know, say, and do. I will, of course, be addressing how pets can be used as tools for the abuser as part of that dynamic. So first of all, what is intimate partner violence? I'm going to talk a little bit about the terminology. In the title, I use the term domestic violence because that's the one that's most commonly recognized. We actually like to use the term intimate partner violence because it's a little bit more inclusive. It includes relationships that aren't necessarily among people who are living in the same home. The key factor here is that intimate partner violence is violence among partners who have an intimate relationship. They may never have lived together, so the domestic maybe doesn't fit as precisely. I will actually use that terminology sort of interchangeably, so you may hear me say both domestic violence and intimate partner violence through the course of the webinar. The key identifying quality in a relationship where intimate partner violence is occurring is that it is a pattern of behavior. It's very seldom one incident. It's a pattern of behavior used by one person to gain power and control over another person with whom they have or have had an intimate relationship. It's a whole spectrum. Oftentimes when people who are not very familiar with domestic violence or the dynamics of it, they often think strictly of the physical abuse. So if someone comes to work with a black eye and comes out that their partner did it, it's very clear that that is domestic violence. However, some of the other aspects are not as obvious to others, and sometimes they're not as obvious to those who are experiencing the abuse, and possibly even those who are perpetrating the abuse. So the spectrum of behaviors, again, in a pattern that make up intimate partner violence include physical, psychological, emotional, verbal, financial, sexual, and spiritual abuse. There can be excessive jealousy and control. Sexual assault can take place. Harassment after separation, and all the way up at the end of the spectrum is murder. Intimate partner violence does not discriminate. Anyone can be impacted. So individuals of all genders, all racial, economic, educational, religious, and cultural backgrounds can be impacted. There are certain groups that are more likely to experience it, which I'm going to touch on that briefly. As well, there are some groups that experience barriers to getting support. So I'll get into that, but just know there's no one demographic that is the group that experiences intimate partner violence. It can and does happen to anyone. So let's break down some of these items that are in the scope, the spectrum of intimate partner violence. Of course, you have the physical abuse, again, the most obvious, things like punching, slapping, sometimes threats of physical harm or death. Confinement is a form of physical abuse that's very concerning. So that could be anything from simply preventing your partner from leaving when they're trying to get away during an argument, but it could be as serious as keeping a partner in a bathroom, the bedroom, the basement for an extended period of time. And again, that's meant to intimidate, that's meant to control, and it is very much part of the pattern of behavior. I want to specifically mention choking, which is also known as strangulation, as a very serious risk factor for further violence. And in fact, it's highly linked through statistics to risk of death. So if you know anyone who's experiencing this form of violence, who's experienced choking or strangulation by a partner, please know that that is a serious situation and refer them to help. Sometimes when we talk about choking, people think only about something wrapped around your neck or hands around your neck, but do know that that also includes where someone's putting their arm against your throat, pushing you against a wall, holding you down on the floor with an arm, or using a pillow to suffocate. All of those fit that definition of choking or strangulation. And again, that is a very high risk factor if that is taking place. For sexual abuse, when it takes place within a relationship, can be something that's very gray. It's not very black and white. And often people think that how can sexual assault or rape even take place if you are in a couple relationship, an intimate relationship? In fact, it wasn't until the 80s that it actually became illegal for a husband to rape his wife. So we still have those, there's that gendered language around that. The point here is that oftentimes in those relationships, it's very unclear if this is something where it is okay to do or it's not okay. So when there is coercion to do things that one partner isn't comfortable with, if there is threats, for example, to expose intimate images, perhaps to share them online, that would all fit the piece of the pattern, which is sexual abuse. Verbal abuse, making degrading comments, fits very much into that emotional and psychological abuse. And again, the goal there on the part of the perpetrator is to establish their control, to tear down the self-esteem of the victim partner by making them think that they're many terrible things. They're stupid, they're ugly, no one else would ever want them, no one else would ever believe them. They're not capable of living on their own, etc., etc. Also under psychological threats, you have isolating the victim from family and friends. Sometimes that actually means that they end up with no support system whatsoever. There's no one left that they can actually reach out to for help. Psychological can also include threats around children. If you ever leave me, you will never see the children again. If you leave me, I'll call social services and tell them you're a terrible parent. If you leave me, I'll kill the children, or I'll kill other family members and you will never see them again, or I will kill you. Pets can be brought into this again, as the threats to harm, to kill, tormenting pets as a way to intimidate the victim are all part of that emotional psychological abuse. The term gaslighting actually comes from first it was a play and then it was a movie, I believe in the 1940s. It's a classic black and white movie. If you ever have a chance to watch it, I highly encourage you to do so. The premise behind the movie, it's called Gaslight, is that one partner is doing everything he can to make the other partner doubt their own experience of reality. And the main way they do that in this movie, it is the time period where instead of electricity, they had gas lights to light their homes. And there was a little dial you could turn up or down to make the lights brighter or dimmer. And one of the main characters who's trying to convince his wife that she is crazy in order to take her money by having her declared incompetent. He goes around turning the lights up and down and then telling her that it's all in her head. She's just imagining it. So the way gaslighting plays out in real life often is where the abusive partner will do or say things and then deny that they happened, minimize, say, no, it didn't happen like that, tell others a completely different version of events. This really keeps the victim off base. They don't know what to expect. They do begin to doubt their own reality, and many are being told that they're crazy, they're losing it, they're forgetful. One example that we sometimes share is of an individual who her keys kept going missing, and eventually she realized that her partner was hiding them from her and then saying that it was her who was actually going crazy and being disorganized and losing the keys. So this is something that's far more common than you might imagine. And it's very disturbing to individuals who are on the receiving end of that behavior. Economic abuse is another one that's perhaps not widely thought of in terms of domestic violence. So this could be as simple as all of the bank accounts are in one person's name, all of the assets are in one person's name. The credit cards might be in the name of the person who's wanting to establish their control, but they might also be in the name of the victim partner, so that if it comes down to one of them having to be responsible for an overwhelming level of debt, it's actually the victim. And so this is something working in shelters we would often see, where very often the rental lease was in the victim's name, utilities are in the victim's name. Sometimes the perpetrator would say, you know, yes, I'm paying those bills, give me the money, I'll pay those bills, they're all paid up. And then when the couple actually separates, it comes out that those bills have not been paid, the money was taken, and the victim is the one who's on the hook and has to deal with the fallout and the consequences from that. Sometimes this economic abuse actually means interfering with employment. When individuals have a job, they have their own income, they have a support system around them, they have people they can talk to, there's people that can see them if they're injured or upset that can offer them support. So there's a benefit to being employed in addition to the financial benefits. If you don't have a job, you don't have the funds to leave if you wish to, and it's another way to cut off those supports to those individuals. Spiritual abuse is using beliefs to manipulate or control. Sometimes that actually means using scriptures, the word of scriptures, to justify the abuse. Sometimes it means denigrating someone's beliefs and using that as a way to say that they're naive, they're stupid for believing that. It also could mean that a person is being prevented from practicing their spiritual beliefs. And again, that often is part of trying to isolate the person and prevent them from having others who could notice the fact that they're experiencing abuse. Certainly, stalking behavior has become even more persistent and easy to do given the advances in technology that we have currently. So in the past, stalking was something like someone persistently calling, maybe texting, maybe emailing, maybe driving around your house or workplace and showing up. And that still happens. But increasingly, abusers are using technology to stalk and harass. So that could be something like putting tracking devices on vehicles, on cell phones, putting in software to track the individual by their phone. It could be actually having hidden cameras or hacking into, when people have smart home devices, there have been cases of a partner who's left that home knowing the code or hacking into that system and using it to torment the individual by turning things off and off, lights, for example, on and off, TVs on and off, heat up and down, locking and unlocking doors, just as a way, again, to torment and intimidate their victim. You might wonder why being nice is in this list of part of the pattern of abuse. It's because no person is ever horrible 100% of the time. And when people get involved in relationships where ultimately intimate partner violence or abuse takes place, they didn't go into this knowing that the person was going to use these behaviors. These behaviors are gradual, they happen over time. You could liken it to the analogy of the frog in the pot of hot water who's already cooking before he realizes it's hot enough to jump out. Being nice keeps the victim, again, a little bit off track. You don't know when you come home at the end of the day, is it going to be the nice partner who buys you gifts, who thinks you're wonderful, or is it going to be the angry partner who's going to lash out and maybe be physically violent? The other part of being nice is very often abusers who use violence within relationships are only violent and abusive to those in their own home. So they may be seen as someone who's a very nice person in the community. They could have high standing in the community. They could do volunteer work. Their neighbors could think they're the greatest guy. They might be the type of person who always chats with the neighbors, helps take out the garbage, shovels the walk in winter, that sort of thing. And that again makes it more difficult for the victim when they're reaching out for support to ask for help if it's already out there that, you know, he's such a nice guy, he couldn't possibly do that. This power and control wheel is something that was put together through researchers in Duluth, Minnesota, quite some decades ago. I believe it was in the 70s. And it just demonstrates, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but how power and control is at the center of all of the tactics. And they are all geared towards controlling the victim. The reason that, and I will talk about how the time around separation is the most dangerous time. The reason that is the most dangerous time is because that's the time that the abusive partner is about to lose control of their partner, when that decision to separate has taken place. I'll kind of come back to this, so just keep that graphic in mind. The cycle of abuse is a diagram that's used to describe what it's like to live through living with someone with an abusive intimate partner. Oftentimes, things actually start in the honeymoon phase. So this is, again, at the beginning of the relationship, you're in the honeymoon phase. Often, again, a red flag is when a couple just meets and one partner pushes for very, very quick involvement. They want to move in right away. They want to speak, they want to be with you every day. They need to know where you are. They say that it's because they love you. They love you so much that they have to see you as much as possible, and they miss you. So that's why they're calling and texting and checking up. And so at first, that can seem very romantic, but over time, you start to realize, the victim will start to realize that that's a way of keeping tabs on them. It's a way of establishing control. Then you get to the tension building stage where tensions start to increase. Maybe, the victim, in the first go round of this cycle, starts to realize that that's a little bit too much pressure, a little bit too much closeness, and they start to pull back. Now there's going to be some tension. There might be some aggressive statements on behalf of the perpetrator. The victim starts to be fearful and feels like they need to do things to bring the other person down, to calm them down. Very often victims will describe this phase as the walking on eggshells phase. It can be really short, or it can actually drag on for quite a while. And it is excruciating because for the victim, especially when this cycle has happened a few times, they know what's about to happen. This has actually led some victims to force what's number 2 on the screen here, the incident. Because they know what happens at the incident. Now there's the crisis, there might be verbal, emotional, or physical abuse. Often there's arguing, there might be threats or intimidation. And after the incident, very commonly what happens is you get to the reconciliation phase. So this is where the abuser apologizes. They start to justify their behavior. It wasn't my fault. I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't done this. Oh no, it didn't happen like that. You don't remember that, right? So the perpetrator comes up with a lot of good reasons to justify and excuse their behavior. And oftentimes, this is, again, you're off base as a victim and you accept that. You think maybe it was you, maybe you're remembering it wrong, maybe it wasn't that bad. And you start back to the honeymoon phase. There may be grand gestures, there might be flowers, gifts, etc. And it goes around again. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is over time, the frequency and severity of the incidents increase. To the point where in relationships where abuse has been ongoing for some time, that whole honeymoon period, almost ceases to exist, and it's just a continuous spiral. In some, on the lower end of the scale, it actually can be months or even years between go-rounds of the cycle. It really depends on the relationship. I've lost my cursor. There we go. So, again, back to the link here. Pets are very much part of our families. You're seeing there a picture of my dog, Maisie, looking extremely pleased with herself for having brought out every toy in her toy box and putting them on the living room rug. You can see from the slide, at least 8 million people in Canada, probably more since you have your dog people and your cat people. Some have both. Across Canada have pets. 41% of households have at least one dog. And of those who own pets, over 80% view them as members of their family. I know that if I ever had to leave my home because of violence and abuse, I wouldn't leave if I couldn't take Maisie with me. So this is a very serious consideration and a barrier for many people who are experiencing violence. Another interesting fact is that children are more likely to grow up in a home with a pet than a home with two parents. So the bond between animals and people has been demonstrated through research to have both physical and emotional positive impacts. It reduces blood pressure, it has calming properties, it encourages physical activity, and actually for anyone who has a dog knows that when you're walking down the street, it's very common for people to, approach you, to ask questions about the dog, to ask what your dog's name is. In fact, most people actually know the neighbors, the dog owning neighbors in their general area by the name of the dog rather than the name of the person, as that is more easily shared, it seems, in our society. So this is not just a choice that people are making to own pets. It's something that's very therapeutic for those who do own pets. Another picture of Maisie enjoying a walk on a beautiful summer's day. Because we have this bond with our pets, they can be used to further the abuse. So if an abuser is threatening to harm or kill the pet, that's going to make me as a victim very terrified to do anything that is not what my abuser wants me to do. Slightly more subtle ways of using abuse involving the pet would be to not allow veterinary care when needed by the pet, to not buy food for the pet. And sadly, there are cases, documented cases, where abusers actually hurt, kill, surrender, or abandon the pet. An example of this was in Nova Scotia about 1.5 years ago, where a couple had separated, the woman left, and she wasn't able to take the cat with her because where she was going to, they did not allow pets. Her ex-partner proceeded to take a series of videos with him doing various things with the cat, including trying to strangle it, holding it out off their balcony, and other things that were clearly unpleasant to the cat. The goal, however, was to intimidate and hurt, cause physical distress, emotional and physical distress to the partner. There have been many cases where pets have been killed as well by an abusive partner. And again, what's the message being sent there? These are living beings that I know you care about. We consider them part of our joint family, but in order to control you or to intimidate you, I can kill them. So what does that make you think that I could do to you? So very, very concerning and terrifying for the families who experience that. You'll notice when I'm talking, I often use examples of female victims, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, as mentioned at the beginning, I did spend 20 years working in a women's emergency shelter for domestic violence victims and survivors. So that's the examples that I know. Again, all genders do experience intimate partner violence. However, women are twice as likely to be physically injured, 7 times more likely to fear for their life, and up to 86% of victims are women. Of police reported, well, actually that's of intimate partner homicides. Unfortunately, in Canada, a woman is murdered by a current or former partner approximately every 5 days. In Saskatchewan, we do have the dubious distinction of having over double the national rate of intimate partner violence. police reported. So again, this is not, this is only the incidents that are reported to police. And we know that only about 1/5 of incidents of intimate partner violence are actually reported. So if you look at the numbers, over 6,000 in 1 year in Saskatchewan, again, 80% of the victims were female. I do want to note though, and again, Stats Canada only collects data with binary genders, male and female. I want to just comment that Saskatchewan's rate of police-reported intimate partner violence for men is also much higher than the national average. So this is a Saskatchewan issue, but in general, intimate partner violence does tend to be a gendered crime. And just the stat on the bottom is extrapolated for the amount of, it's an average of course, but on average, a Saskatchewan woman is killed by her current and former partner about every 4 months. This graph is a visual representation of those stats, just so you can see where we fit in Canada. We always used to say we don't show you the territories because if we did, the bar would be about 2 computer screens over. It's so high, that ratio per capita rate of police-reported intimate partner violence. I'm sorry to tell you that we've recently discovered through another Stats Canada report that in northern Saskatchewan, the rate is actually higher than in the territories. So very concerning. We have lots of work to do here in Saskatchewan to address this issue. I mentioned there were some groups that face increased risk. So these include Indigenous women, younger women. So that 18 to 24 range tends to experience higher rates of intimate partner violence. Women experiencing disability have very high rates of all forms of violence, and that's backed up by research. Immigrant women, it may not experience increased intimate partner violence numerically, as we sometimes think. Culturally, it's true that there are some traditions that make violence against women more acceptable. What the research shows, though, is that it's actually more about barriers to support. So if English isn't your first language, if you don't know the law in Canada, if you don't know that intimate partner violence is illegal and you know, largely unacceptable in Canada, you are less likely to report or try to leave. Also, in some of those communities, there can be pressure from family and from community to stay in the relationship. I'd already mentioned women who are at the point of separating. Again, high risk time. This is sad but true. Sometimes the abuse actually begins or increases during pregnancy of the victim. Very disturbing to hear stories. I've heard more than I like to think about where the abuse starts around that time and the perpetrator is kicking, punching at the belly of the pregnant woman. Just very disturbing. And women who live in rural and northern communities, again, I just mentioned that extremely high rates in the north. And I do think I have a slide specifically about that. Yes, here we go. So rates of police-reported intimate partner violence are higher in rural and remote areas. So is intimate partner homicide. So there's a few reasons for that. There's definitely less access to services, counseling, women's shelters, even law enforcement. It could be hours before police are able to attend. And sometimes that's a really tough decision that victims have to make to try and figure out what's going to happen 2 hours from now if the police show up. Is everything going to have calmed down? Will the crisis incident already be over? Or will they already have experienced the physical harm or be dead when the police show up? And will it just, or RCMP in that case, will it just make it worse for them if they do call? So that's a consideration. Just the geographic difficulty in accessing help because of lack of transportation. We no longer have intercity bus services. If you don't have a driver's license, you don't have a vehicle, how are you getting out to somewhere safe? Often in rural communities, there's concerns about confidentiality. People don't want everyone to know their business. They see it as a private matter. So all of these factors contribute to there being higher rates and higher risk in rural and isolated communities. Very often when you're talking about domestic violence or stories, are in the news, about someone who's experienced violence, maybe it's a celebrity, and people will say, well, why doesn't she just leave? And we'd like you to consider that there's an alternate question, which is, why does the abuser abuse? There are many reasons why people don't leave. It could be fear. Maybe they've been told they will be killed if they leave. Maybe there was a history of abuse in their own home and they grew up thinking that that's normal. Maybe they've been told that you can't make it on your own and they believe that. Maybe they've been told they're to blame for the abuse and they believe that too. Maybe they're afraid that they wouldn't be able to survive financially if they've been prevented from working. They don't know about the finances. There might be debt. And as we know, social assistance rates are very, very low in Saskatchewan. So you could be making a choice between living with violence on one hand and living in poverty on the other. One of the main reasons, though, is that they still love their partner. They believe they can change. They hope for the best. They remember the dream they had of that relationship. And they just think if they can hang in there a little bit longer, maybe things will change. They don't want the relationship to end. They just want the violence to end. There's concerns for the children. Sometimes people believe it's better for the children to be, in a two-parent home. And there can also be pressure from family, the cultural norms. And again, if you had to leave, but you knew that there was nowhere for you to go with your pets, or that if you left them behind, they could be harmed or killed, that is also a reason for choosing not to leave. So why doesn't she report to police? Why do only 1 in 5 of incidents get reported? Sometimes there have been threats. If you ever call the police, then you're really going to get it. Fear of the children being taken away by social services if they attend and there's violence taking place. Again, the stigma often and shame often go on the victim rather than the perpetrators. She's going to be afraid of those questions. Why didn't you leave? Why did you wait so long? There could be distrust of the justice system and government agencies. Certainly if you're from a more vulnerable or marginalized community, you may not have good experiences with law enforcement and the justice system, so you're hesitant to involve them. Again, normalization of violence. Isn't this how all relationships are? It's expected, it's normal. Pressure from family or community, marriage is for life, you have to stay, that's it. And perhaps lack of culturally appropriate services where you feel like you just wouldn't be understood. And again, that whole issue of not feeling that your privacy would be respected. So when people think about, or if they're thinking, if anyone out there, or anyone out there is thinking that it's worth it to stay together for the children's sake, I encourage you to consider these statistics. Children see or hear 40 to 80% of domestic violence incidents. Oftentimes the parents will believe that the children aren't aware. They were upstairs in bed sleeping. They were downstairs playing video games. They weren't there. They didn't know about it. Research actually shows children are very aware. They're hearing it. They can feel the tension even if they're outside playing and they come back into the house. Research has even shown impacts on fetuses in utero when the mother is exposed to intimate partner violence. Sadly, there's a strong correlation between being in a home where intimate partner violence is taking place and actual direct abuse of children. So there is the risk of them being injured not only by direct abuse, but if they try and get between their parents to protect one of them, they can also be harmed that way. Sadly, they're sometimes also included in murder-suicides where one partner deciding, that kind of thing, if I can't have you, no one can, will kill the children, sometimes and the spouse and themselves, sometimes just kill the children as a way to punish their partner. The trauma experienced by children who are exposed to this type of violence, it impacts their brain development. There are long-term impacts on their physical and mental well-being. They're also more likely to grow up and repeat that pattern of behavior. What they've witnessed is now normalized for them, and that perpetuates the intergenerational cycle of violence and abuse. So what can you say? What do you say to someone who's experiencing intimate partner violence? Number one, I should change these around on the slide. Number one is I believe you. Victims have often been told that they won't be believed, and therefore they are very scared and nervous of sharing the information. They've been told it's their fault. Very important to say, I will support you in your decisions. I will support you no matter what you choose, and don't try and make those decisions for them. So the Make It Our Business program was developed by Western Education out of London, Ontario. And they came up with this really nifty way to remember how to have a conversation about abuse. It's called the SYNC IT, or See It, Name It, Check It. So if you see something that your gut reaction is that something is not right here, you see it. Then, as picking a safe time to do this, you name it. You speak to the person that you're concerned about. You say, I'm concerned about you. Name the specific warning signs that you've seen. Do not jump to conclusions. You want to ask the question and hear the answer. Don't immediately assume anything. And then check it. Ask questions. Are you okay? Do you want to talk? So here's just a couple. I won't read all of these, but a few examples of a SYNC IT conversation. If it's at work, you might say, I've noticed that you've had trouble meeting your deadlines lately. Is something bothering you? Do you want to talk about it? If it's your neighbor, maybe you want to say, I heard loud voices from your house last night. I'm here if you want to talk. So again, you're just asking the question, you're naming it. I overheard your partner yelling at you on the phone. Are you okay? Do you want to talk? Remember that it's not your role to be the therapist or fix the situation. What you want to do is show concern and offer support. You want to open the door for them to share what they're willing to share with you. Make sure that you choose a time and place that are appropriate for the conversation. So there's some privacy, there's some time for the person. Don't ask this, if it's a coworker, don't ask them the question just before a big meeting or at the start of the day. Maybe do it at lunch break, the end of the day. Make sure that it is a good time and you won't be interrupted when having this conversation. If they don't disclose, you can still tell them about resources in the community. You can reach out to experts yourself. I'll have some resources to share at the end of the presentation here. So you can call a crisis line and just say, I'm worried about someone. Can I ask you some questions about what I've seen and what I should do next? If it's an issue that's you're aware of in the workplace, you can check to see if there are workplace supports. Increasingly there are now, and I'm going to talk about some legislation for workers in a minute here. Continue to watch for warning signs and risk factors and have another SYNC IT conversation if you see more warning signs. If the person you're worried about still denies the abuse and you're concerned, it's really important to recognize that most people don't want to talk about the abuse. They may feel either afraid of their abusive partner or protective towards them. They may still be concerned about the stigma. They may not be seeing themselves as a victim. It is really hard to ask for help, but acknowledging that it's difficult, that there are conflicting emotions, and that you will be there when they're ready to talk are really important and helpful. So, how to overcome your hesitation to help. If you feel that it's none of your business, please do know that abuse in relationships only gets worse without intervention. If you're afraid that you don't know what to say, saying you care and are concerned is a really good start. If you think it's a private matter, it isn't when someone is being hurt. So another aspect of this is how to talk to someone who may be using violence. Again, think about that. Save time, save place. Be very clear and direct about what you've seen. You can use that SYNC IT model. Try not to make judgmental statements about them as a person. Make it more about the behaviors. Do not validate attempts to blame others. Don't let them divert attention from their behavior. Tell them that you are concerned for them and their safety, the safety of their partner and their children. Do call the police if you believe the victim is in danger. Recognize that abusers are likely to deny the abuse. So again, they're going to minimize, they're going to deflect. Keep your conversation focused on your concerns for their family's safety and well-being. And, you know, they need support too. People who are using violence, they could go to counseling. There may be employee assistance programs they could access. There are treatment programs out there for individuals who use violence. So try and approach it in a supportive manner, and remember to always keep yourself safe. Never get caught in the middle of an assault, and call police in case of an emergency. So what to do? Understand that leaving is a process. Victims may leave and return several times. Many never report to the police. Don't assume that they want to leave. One of the worst things you can do for someone who's been controlled, who's had their behavior monitored, controlled, been told what they can and cannot do, is for you to jump in and tell them what to do. So make sure the choice is up to them, the timing is up to them, and try not to get frustrated if, in fact, they do leave and return. It's very normal behavior, and the decision is always that of the survivor. Know the risk factors. These risk factors were identified through research, specifically domestic violence death reviews. So actual or pending separation, a history of domestic violence, when there is obsessive behavior on the part of the perpetrator. They're thinking about them all the time. They're talking about them all the time. So this is something you might notice if you know the perpetrator as opposed to the victim, that they're obsessed with their former partner. This is concerning. If the perpetrator appears depressed, if there have been prior threats or attempts of suicide, if the level of violence is increasing or stalking behavior has taken place. Additional ones, if the victim is afraid for their life, this is significant and has been proved through research to be an accurate risk factor. If there's been a threat to kill, if there are financial difficulties or the perpetrator is unemployed, if there have been prior attempts to isolate the victim from family and friends. So again, especially in combination, these risk factors indicate a dangerous situation. Please do call 911 if you believe someone is in danger. Know the resources in your area. So there are women's shelters, first stage emergency shelters. There's no cost to stay in a shelter. Individuals can self-refer. Every single shelter is going to have a 24-hour crisis line. There are staff there always ready to answer questions and give advice. They have outreach programs. There are second stage shelters which can help individuals, support them for up to 2 years. So that's extremely helpful in people making that transition from a life of violence to a life violence-free. In addition, the counseling services I mentioned before, Family Service Saskatoon, Envision Counseling Services in Weyburn, just a couple examples, will provide outreach programs. They have individual and group counseling, and some of them have domestic violence court case workers as well. So if you're referring someone to a shelter, or if you needed to go yourself, know that they are a secure facility. They're not like a big barracks where everyone is crammed together. Women and families have their own private bedrooms. There are shared kitchens and living rooms. There's, play areas for children. There are, again, common areas for watching TV, etc. Staff are always there to provide support, to provide systems and navigation, just to lend a listening ear. And always you will find an atmosphere of respect. You can support efforts to establish pet-friendly shelters. So in Saskatchewan, you can support the partnership, Saskatchewan SPCA Stops to Violence and PAS. I see Josh has jumped back in. I'm getting a little bit close to time. Is it okay if I just keep going, Josh? Okay, he's given me the thumbs up. So yes, do support our partnership. We do various fundraising activities. If you are someone or know someone who's leaving a violent situation and you do have pets, please check with your local shelter for options, as some do have arrangements with either local humane societies or other pet rescue agencies, and some have even taken the odd pet. So don't assume that you won't be taken with a pet, but at this point we have no shelter in Saskatchewan that's specifically officially pet friendly. Just a brief listing of ones that are in Canada, so we know it can be done. And if you're interested in further information on the topic, you can check out the website of Ellie Phillips, Sheltering Families and Animals Together, or Safety Shelters. I looked at her page today to see how many pet-friendly shelters there are in the US, and there was far too many for me to count without forgetting how many I had counted. So there's many out there. It can be done. And this redrover.org is actually an organization. It's out of the US. It didn't appear to have any Canadian listings at this time, but it is connecting individuals looking for that resource with shelters that are pet friendly. So there is also legislation to assist victims. Victims of Interpersonal Violence Act. The key thing I want to mention there is emergency intervention orders. That is an order that would allow a victim to stay in their home, and the perpetrator would be asked to leave. So again, if it's a short-term order, usually around 30 days, but it prevents, say, if the victim is a woman with children, it prevents her from leaving and leaving behind everything, not being close to school, not having the toys for the children, etc. Instead of them having to go to shelter, and the abusive partner has the luxury of remaining in the home. Also fairly new is Clare's Law. This is now in effect in Saskatchewan, where individuals, usually it's people who are just starting a relationship, they're noticing red flags, maybe someone has said something to them about their partner's history, that they are actually able to make an application to access information if there is a criminal history or police involvement in past intimate partner relationships. We also have the amendment to the Residential Tenancies Act, which allows individuals to get out of a lease with 28 days notice. If they have been living with someone and intimate partner violence is taking place, they can get out of their lease early. And the final one there, Saskatchewan Employment, the Interpersonal Violence Leave Amendment, specifically allows for up to 10 days leave from work if you've been experiencing intimate partner violence. 5 are paid, 5 are unpaid. And for information on any of those, you can call one of PATH's member agencies, and they should be, or PATH's. I have my contact information actually at the end. So you would be able to get more information on those, that legislation from us. So know where to find help. There is a page on 211 Saskatchewan that lists all the services available around abuse in Saskatchewan. PATH's website, pathsk.org. Get Help Now tab has listings of all the shelters and services in the province. And sheltersafe.ca, this is a screen grab. It's a clickable map here that you can use to find services wherever in Canada you might be looking. So with that, I will turn it back over to Josh to see if we had any questions.
Actually, Joanne, we do not have any questions. A very thorough presentation. I know actually for me, I had jotted a couple down, but then you go to the next slide and there was the answer that I was looking for, specifically as it pertained to, you know, what somebody's experience could be like if they are looking to use the services provided by a transition house or an emergency shelter. So without any questions, Joanne, do you have any last minute thoughts that you would like to leave the attendees with?
I guess my parting thoughts would be that this is such a complex issue. This is not something that can be solved strictly through legislation. It can't be solved strictly through law enforcement. We actually need to have a shift in our communities, in our families, and in individuals. And I believe, and I know that PATH's member agencies believe, that this needs to start with young people. We strongly support mandatory education on healthy relationships within the school system, but everybody out there can help by talking to young people in their homes and families and friends, and just make sure they understand what healthy relationships are and are not, and that the new generation grows up not feeling that all those elements, when I talked about the spectrum of behaviors in intimate partner violence, that any of those are normal or okay. We really need to shift our way of thinking about violence and abuse.
Very, very true. We have a comment actually that just came through. from Crystal, who, and again, this is important as well, we also need to focus on healthy reunification of families, which is very important as well. Thank you for that, Crystal. I think I've realized now that I forgot to introduce myself earlier with the presentation. So I am Josh Horry, the Community Relations Coordinator here at the Saskatchewan SPCA. I would like to thank everybody who has taken the time out of your day to join us today. We encourage you to keep, an ear to the ground as we do have some other webinars coming up as it relates to this topic of domestic violence. As Joanne had mentioned, we do have some webinars coming up relating to the new research project that was carried out, some updated research to the link in Saskatchewan. So we're quite excited about that. Stay tuned to our newsletters, websites, social media for any information as it relates to that. And again, Joanne, just one last check-in. If you have no further comments or questions, then we will bid adieu to our participants. And again, please take a moment to take the survey and provide us your feedback, because we do want to make these presentations a semi-regular event, and we do want to provide content that is usable to the people in our community. So again, thank you for participating.
And thanks to you, Josh. My final comment.
Thank you.